Thank you. Well, good morning, good evening, and good noon to all of our tech-seeking global tribe. I'm super excited to be here today. My name's Carrie Mott. I'm not Dave Anderson, but I am dedicated to helping bring together silos across our data community. And that's why I've been entrusted by Dave to host this special edition of Tech Seeking Human for this week, where we bring together privacy, data analytics, and security professionals to talk about data as a product in the era of AI. Now, to set the scene, I think we all know that good data means good Gen AI, but in the AI realm, treating data as a standalone revenue-boosting product is really pivotal. And that's because the data as a product paradigm doesn't just fuel AI advancements, but it turns data handling into a strategic, customer-centric approach that really helps propel innovation, democratizes analytics, and helps mitigate risk and drive competitive advantage. Now, that said, we also recognize that machine learning and AI integration within data as a product frameworks needs to help empower businesses to unlock forward-looking insights, to boost productivity, and to optimize decision-making. And through leveraging historical data, large language models are set to anticipate market shifts, streamline operations, create highly customized customer experiences, and certainly impact almost every department and industry. But to realize those gains, it's going to require a really concerted effort across the organization, bringing together experts from data, analytics, privacy, and security to form a formidable cross-functional team. And as a CMO and a go-to-market leader, I myself have a very deep respect for all things data, analytics, and privacy. So I'm super excited to be joined today by some incredible experts, first of which is Randy Bean. Hi, Randy.
Hi, Carrie. How are you?
So happy to have Randy here. I'm good, thank you. We've pulled together time zones, and thank you for making that happen. For those who haven't had the chance to come across Randy in the past, he is the godfather of Chief Data and Analytics Officers worldwide. And I understand a recent grandfather. So again, congratulations, Randy. Randy authored a book called Fail Fast, Learn Faster, Lessons in Data-Driven Leadership in an Age of Disruption, Big Data and AI. He's a regular contributor to HBR, Forbes, MIT Sloan, and he works with countless brands globally to help really develop and accelerate their org-wide data and analytics strategy. So we're very glad to have him on today's session. Of course, we're also joined by the one and only Michelle Finneran Dennedy. Hi, Michelle.
Hello.
Hello. As the CEO of PrivacyCode and the partner of Privatus Consulting, Michelle's really the OG of Chief Privacy Officers and certainly one of the most respected global privacy experts. She was the author of the Privacy Engineers Manifesto and previously held Chief Privacy Officer roles with McAfee, Intel, and Cisco, now working with global brands to ensure privacy by design is embedded across organizations and ecosystems. No small task there, Michelle. Now, last but not least, we have with us Yassir. Yassir is a really progressive Chief Information Security Officer, board member and advisor. He's led security functions at some pretty big names. Google, Okta, Splunk, UiPath. Sure, there's another couple thrown in there, Yassir. But he recently founded an organization called Silicon Valley Cyber, where he works with chief information security officers and their execs teams to drive the information security agenda through innovative engineering and a strong partnership with the business. So Yassir is rounding out our security component today. Hi, Yassir.
Hey, everybody.
Now, I know that we've pulled together a lot of different time zones, a lot of continents. I think it's a different day in each location right now. So I thought we would warm up for today's session with a couple of rapid fire questions just to get everybody going. So Randy, Michelle, and Yassir, help me finish this sentence. Gen AI is the biggest thing since
online payments.
At least since the internet.
Love it. Yep. These all sound fairly fair. Yassir?
I would say it is. I agree with Randy. It is the biggest thing since the internet.
Yeah, phenomenal. And look, I think we recognise that it's a all-encompassing and significant change to all of our environments. So we're looking forward to diving into that. Another question. We all know that I'm a big fan of science fiction rather than fiction. So I thought I'd ask you all, favourite book or movie that touches on the future of AI and why. Maybe we can start with you, Yassir.
Yeah, I would say the book that I read recently is called The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman. He is the co-founder of DeepMind, which is a company that was founded and acquired by Google back in 2014. So that is an amazing book. Highly, highly recommended.
Awesome. I'm adding it to my reading list. Thank you for that. What about you, Randy?
Well, Yassir stole a bit of my thunder. I happened to attend the Wall Street Journal Tech Live event in October, and Sam Altman was the keynote speaker. They also had Mustafa Suleyman, and I read his book, The Coming Wave, and they also had Fei-Fei Li from Stanford, another great book, The World I See.
Yeah, fantastic. Awesome. Okay, number 2 on the list. Michelle, do you have one to add?
I do have one, and I even have it here. It's called Non-Invasive Data Governance Strikes Again by Robert Seiner. So supporting all of those new inventions are old-fashioned notions of protecting it all from within.
Oh, I love that. I can see that everybody is full into fiction and probably makes sense given where we're currently at in Gen AI adoption. Another quick fast round. What's the coolest application of Gen AI you've seen to date?
So I can start. I think I'm going to keep it simple on this one. I'm just going to say OpenAI or ChatGPT. It did revolutionize how we do work, how we entertain, how we communicate, how we create as a society. So to me, it is one of the coolest applications that I have a chance to interact with today.
So I think for Gen AI, I think it's undeniable because I think of all of the various machine learning applications, it's the one that got 12-year-olds excited about this 20-year-old technology. It's the one that got hairdressers to care. And it's the one that has really gotten the mindset and the mind share of Wall Street, Main Street, and Silicon Valley all unified together behind this really awesome, and I mean that as some.
Get it. And Randy?
Because I live in Boston, I have exposure to the various universities. So in October, I had the chance to attend a discussion at Harvard Medical School. And what they were sharing was that using AI, they found that AI could diagnose patient diseases better than doctors 90% of the time. And that actually, using generative AI, it was more compassionate than doctors 80% of the time. A week later, I led a panel where I had the chief AI officer of the Mayo Clinic on that panel, and I asked him about that data, and he said it was the exact same thing that they found out. So, very interesting application.
Yeah, the ability to transform healthcare and certainly the medical industry is such an important area. Thanks for that share. Well, last but not least in our fast fire round, considering we're here to silo bust and bring together different functions focused on data analytics in the age of AI, a chief privacy officer, a chief security officer, and a chief data and analytics officer walk into a bar to talk generative AI. What's the one thing they all agree on? Michelle?
Common definitions.
Randy?
I actually love that answer because I spend so much time speaking to business leaders, and I write for business leaders. And as I describe it, I have to write at a third grade level, and people say, ha, ha, ha. And I say, no, I'm really serious. I have to explain everything. Even when I say AI, I say that means artificial intelligence, which means the following.
Yep, that clarification makes sense. You see that?
Also, they agree on the need to adopt Gen AI in every aspect of the business. If not, they run the risk of becoming obsolete here or the organization.
Great answer. And there's a fair amount of agreement there across the 3 roles. Love it. Thank you for that. Hopefully everybody feels warmed up. Let's get into some of the meaty topics. We now have a shifting figure, but the global generative AI market is worth somewhere in the vicinity of 45 billion plus in 2024, which is more than a 55% increase in the last 2 years alone. The Financial Times reports that 92% of Fortune 500 firms already have adopted generative AI in some form. So there's no denying that we're moving at warp speed. I think we all recognise that. Perhaps what's even more surprising is McKinsey has reported that over 61% of workers are already using Gen AI tools in their day-to-day tasks. whether or not their organizations permit it or otherwise. So we're already seeing the adoption and rapid response to the seemingly endless benefits of AI. But the realization of those benefits is going to also require a change in the way that we think, work, and collaborate. And this is increasingly being referred to as the great AI upskill. Now, Randy, I might direct this one to you. Building a data culture is cited as one of the biggest parts of the AI upskill, and certainly one of the key challenges that's been listed by CIOs around the globe as they embrace Gen AI across their organizations. Why do you think that data culture and literacy is playing such an important role? And what do you think are the keystones for success or roadblocks to avoid for the executives leaving?
Okay. I'm going to share a bunch of data with you, and I'll try to speak fast. So for a dozen years, I've been conducting a survey of data leaders from Fortune 1000 companies. And it's interesting because what this tells us is some of the challenges that organizations face, even 15 years into having appointed a chief data officer. So, for example, and this year, by the way, the data improved significantly due to the adoption of generative AI and greater attention. But, for example, we said, are you driving business innovation with data? That was a good one. 59% said they were last year. This year it jumped to 77%. Are you competing on data and analytics? Last year it was only 40%. This year it jumped to 50%, half and half. Are you managing data as a business asset? Last year it was 39.5%. This year it jumped to 49.1%. We asked, have you created a data-driven organization? Last year and for most of the previous years, it was as low as 23.9%. This year, it actually jumped to 48.1%. And we said, have you established a data and analytics culture? Last year, only 20.6% said yes. This year, it actually increased sharply to 42.6%. When we asked what's the primary reason, whether it's related to technology or is it related to people, process, change management, things of that kind, roughly 90% respond that it relates to people issues, change issues, transformation, changes to processes, skills, things of that kind. And very little has to do with technology. The technology is fundamentally there. It's that it takes a long time for people to transform. And when you look at, say, the Fortune 1000 in the U.S., 90% of those companies are legacy firms. So they have a much greater challenge in adopting, and, they only have to compete with one another. They don't have to compete with Amazon and Apple and Google to survive. So it's a different set of challenges.
Yeah, I get that. If only it was so easy to implement change without humans involved. But that's probably a critical issue. Yassir, Michelle, anything you'd like to add?
So I'll dive in there. I think it's very interesting that we've been hearing about the digital transformation and big data and IoT for at least a decade. So my book turned 10 last January, and I opened it. The opening chapter was written by an AI data scientist. And at the time, people were like, that's kooky. Why aren't you starting with a lawyer or a security guy? And I said, because why do you think we're doing all this IoT? Why do you think we're doing sensors? To get data. What do you think we're doing with data? Well, we're knowing things. So what do you think we're doing with chief data officers? Well, they're providing SAS in the SAS, not SaaS, veracity. Are we predicting things? Like ChatGPT is a good sort of ish engine. Am I getting the ish predictor? Are we getting an LLM transforming things that are a sentence that's a certain sentence? What does a square look like? We can have a visual rendering of what a square certainly looks like. This is why the synergy of a security person, a person, story person, i.e. privacy, and a data person all work so beautifully together. And so it's interesting that now we've gotten the business people to say, oh my God, these people are actually value drivers, because what we're putting together isn't stuff into containers on ships and dealing with the physical supply chain. We've finally onboarded enough sensors and gathered enough sensing information that now that we can actually drive economies, with this information. I think that's what's reflected in the stats that Randy is sharing, is that we have that reflection. We're able to compete based on data, and those who will compete and document and metric will start to really accelerate over the ones that are being left behind. As Yassir was saying, if you're not leveraging this stuff, you're already behind.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's probably a great segue into the next area that we wanted to discuss today. I mean, Jensen Huang infamously quoted, "Software's eating the world, but AI's eating software," which I think we all accept is now the trajectory we're on. But we also need to start to look at not just how do we upskill for that opportunity, but how do we govern that opportunity. And I think as all teams are coming to terms with the opportunity in front of them, we also need to talk about, well, how do we ensure safe, sensible, expandable regulation and guardrails for the use of AI technologies? We've obviously seen some recent changes, recent updates to regulation. I think I'd love to hear from you what you think are the important steps that we've already achieved to date, and what are the areas that might be missing or that are critical focus areas when it comes to governance for the next 12 months.
So I'll dive in as the nerd lawyer on deck. So we've seen Europe come first. I'm switching glasses because now I'm sensing sunlight is turning down. So see, sensors, it's a thing. And you can get data that you can tell the sun is setting. It's amazing. I was reading a dialogue today of people complaining that Europe has gone first, and regulators are either going too fast or too slow for people's tastes. It's a hardware problem. Guess where that legislation came from? Europe. Guess what they're governed by? Civil law. Civil law governs more comprehensively and specifically than common law. Common law is a principle-based. We start with use cases and we put the flesh of case law on top of it. It's use case-based. So we're always going to be behind in civil law and common law countries. The civil law is going to follow the hardware of the land mass that is governed by that type of strategy legislatively. So we are seeing those countries come first. And of course, no surprise, they're following a risk-based approach because that's what their culture does. The common law will follow. So this is where I think it's really interesting, where you come up with the code of law has to somehow assimilate with the code of technology. How do we speak each other's languages and cross that chasm of language? The good news is we have hundreds of years of things like informed consent. We have practices of good data. We have math. We love math. Math crosses many, many boundaries to understand what is good statistical analysis, what's a good piece of data, what's a good enough n size that makes sense, what's good data versus bad data, etc. So when we take the skill sets that we currently have and the disciplines that we have, and we understand the constructs of where these laws and regulations currently sit, where the new stuff is coming from and why they're coming from, then we can start to actually break down the language barriers between policy, technology, and business and start to really propel forward.
Yeah, one thing I want to add is, so AI is becoming a geopolitical issue. I think you all know that China, over the last few years, has invested significant amounts into education industry and so on, and it is seen as the enabler of the next wave of how we compete as nations. And what that means to me is that, as we look at all these regulations that are coming down the pipes, I think we have to be super mindful on how we craft these regulations, how we roll out the regulations in such a way that we enable innovation while maintaining the proper guardrails. I think that's going to be something that is super important to keep in mind moving forward.
Completely agree. And it's probably fair to say, Yassir, governance and security are very, very closely aligned, particularly when it comes to a brave new world of Gen AI and how we look at data in that world. There's certainly a lot of pressure on CISOs and Chief Information Security Officers right now to not just help teams embrace and experiment Gen AI, but to make sure that that can be done in a managed and secure fashion, particularly across enterprises and private business. I know that it may be a short-term strategy, but simply blocking access isn't really going to be a sustainable position moving forward. That's potentially going to see more and more employees find a way to bypass security and IT visibility and control, which is not what we want. From a Chief Information Security Officer perspective, what's keeping up the CISOs that you work with at night, and what are some of the considerations or concerns when it comes to a new AI-powered threat landscape potentially out there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So when I think about the world of AI risk, I tend to categorize organizations in kind of two buckets. One is consumers of AI and producers of AI. So in the first category, consumers of AI, that tends to be like every single organization. I think all of us will be consuming AI or generative AI specifically in our daily lives. So as we mentioned earlier, it's just like it's going to be the new internet. Everyone is using the internet. I think the key is to establish the guardrails to make sure that consumption is done in a way that is responsible through and that our users and employees are aware of the risk. What that means is that we want to, as much as possible, avoid sharing sensitive data with kind of random AI platforms. I'm not going to say all AI platforms because most of the leading AI platforms do have those controls embedded, and they're part of the shared responsibility model, if you will. So to me, that is not a big risk, although it has been overhyped in terms of the risk of sharing sensitive data with these platforms. I don't think it's a huge risk. Also, because Gen AI technology is not meant to store data; it is meant to organize data. So the potential of an OpenAI or some other technology or platform replaying sensitive data is fairly slim. So that's kind of one aspect. Choose the leading and the right Gen AI platforms, and make sure you look out for things like phishing, social engineering. So I think that's where it stops. The second thing, or the second bucket, is one of an organization as a producer of AI or Gen AI, and that's where you start hearing of risks like data poisoning or model poisoning, and also unauthorized access to LLMs and to data that is used to train these models. It's kind of the classic role of a CISO or a security team, which is protecting data and protecting access, but also being mindful of these new attacks, being on the lookout for any new threats, and make sure that you implement mitigations as needed. I have to say that we have yet to hear of a major industry event of let's say a Gen AI platform, major platform that was hacked, or the data breach that caused by Gen AI. We have not seen that. So we see a lot of theory, a lot of experiments, a lot of tools. But again, it's important to be mindful and to keep monitoring the threat landscape in case we need to react.
Yeah, makes sense. Is there a particular AI-powered threat that is perceived as being a likely future instance amongst chief information security officers?
Yeah, I think the ones that I mentioned, data poisoning and model poisoning, those are the main ones. You have kind of a separate category, which is attackers using AI to scale the development of tools, to scale the effectiveness of their tools and their tactics. That's, to me, it's just kind of traditional hacking on steroids, if you will. And in terms of what we need to do about it, it's kind of the same thing we've been doing all of these years, which is just make sure that you have the right controls and protections in place to detect and counter these types of threats.
Yep. Got it. Randy, does that mirror the thinking amongst chief data and analytics officers at the moment?
Yeah, I want to share a few more pieces of data. And again, this data is from Fortune 1000, Global 2000 companies, and all from C-suite executives. We asked, whether generative AI has the potential to be the most transformational technology in a generation, and 2/3 said yes. But we also asked, is there a need for safeguards and guardrails for governing generative AI? 99% said yes. I don't know what the other 1% were thinking, but that's a separate thought. But we asked the safeguards and guardrails for generative AI in place today. 62.9% said yes, so still a lot of work to be done. We asked, are data and AI ethics a top corporate priority? 73% said yes. We asked if the board of directors were well-versed in data and AI issues and responsibilities, and only 51% said yes. We asked if there are well-established policies and practices in place within your organization. Only 42% said yes. And has the industry done enough to address data and AI ethics? Only 15% said yes. So clearly, there's a belief that a lot of work still needs to be done.
That's those are quite sobering statistics, and certainly is a great way for us to discuss a little bit around what we want to be seeing from our C-suite, so across the C-suite boards when it comes to the executives who are responsible for setting vision and strategy in organizations, and what are the priorities that each one of our C-suite or boards need to start looking at, examining, and certainly helping to transform in their organization to help them adopt generative AI in a safe and secure fashion. So I'd love to hear from you all. What do you think is the priority or priorities that the C-suite and board needs to be looking at today when it comes to Gen AI?
I think from my perspective, the C-suite needs to look at their business and understand how AI or Gen AI is poised to impact their business. So I think we're all try to compete and make sure that we assure the survival of the organizations that we work for. And so the question becomes, what does it mean? What does this new revolution, what does this new wave mean for my business? And what can I do to make sure that I remain competitive and be ahead? And it's the answer to that question that needs to be translated into something that is more granular, that impacts the strategy and investment at every aspect of the business. Every single function should potentially have their own AI strategy and have a plan on how to, with targets and so on how to execute, embedding and taking advantage of AI going forward, and how that makes them do work better, faster, a higher level of quality, and the way that is more competitive.
Fantastic. Is there any priorities that you see ignored, Yassir?
Not at this moment. I think everyone is aware, at least around me in my network, everyone is aware of the need that that we have as an industry to get on the train, on the AI train. I don't see anything that is necessarily, but at least I can't think of something that is ignored at this point.
No problem. Thanks for your answer. Randy, you get exposure to a number of different C-suite roles and certainly boards in your position. Is there anything that you believe that boards really need to be looking at today when it comes to Gen AI application, or conversely, things that are being ignored?
I would just echo Yassir's point about the importance of business sponsorship and tying any investments in data and AI to business goals and to business outcomes. I mean, ultimately, we're part of businesses. We're here to serve the businesses and the customers who are who basically generate the revenue and the profits and our jobs and so forth. So, too often I see that data and AI activities are disconnected from business outcomes, kind of one of these, if you build it, they will come. And I often relate the story of going into organizations and meeting, say, with the data and AI teams, and they talk about the capabilities that they've created, and I say, wow, this is fantastic. And I meet with the IT teams, and they talk about the architecture and the platforms they've created, and I say, good job, well done. Then I meet with a line of business leaders and say, so how's it going? And they kind of pause for a moment, and they are careful before they start speaking, and they say, well, the challenge is we often don't trust the data that we're getting. We're not getting the data that we need in a timely fashion to make the decisions that we make. We're not getting the right data. So often there's this disconnect between the capabilities that are being created and the ultimate business needs and business outcomes. So what I encourage organizations to do is to work very closely with business leaders, develop strong business sponsorships so that there's those ties and places. You know, the most successful organizations I see, for example, Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan got up there in front of all the stakeholders and said, you know, without our investments in data and AI, we wouldn't be where we are today. In contrast to that, I see a number of organizations where you have the data and analytics and AI leaders saying, we're creating all these great capabilities. What's the matter with the organization who isn't taking advantage of this stuff? So it points out the benefit of the tight coordination and relationship with the business sponsors.
Absolutely agree. And Michelle, any advice or certainly priorities from your side?
Well, we need more budget for privacy. And I'm only being partially tongue in cheek. So I think you kind of put your money where your mouth is. So it's kind of interesting if you look and you shake out, where are we investing as investment? There's a lot of investment going into, we need a machine in here that goes bing. So where are we putting our money down? Oh, I need a new model that does this. I need more data. I need to acquire a list, and they'll spend $1 million on a dirty list. And occasionally they'll roll out one of us to go, okay, I'll come in as you're doing some due diligence about purchasing some giant list, and they'll say, oh, it's okay. It's all consented. You got 1 billion people to consent? Adorable. You're magic. For what? For how long? What's the context? And no, bad math, bad law, bad everything. So, you know, I think I think looking at this as an inorganic, flat thing is a mistake. Looking at this as one and done compliance is a mistake. Looking at this as like every lawyer has stinky feet and I don't want to talk to them more than once is a mistake. I think we have to think about this as an organic process. We have to think about data as we do food. We have to think about it as it spends a moment in your mouth and it is consumed as an organism. How are we getting rid of data? There are people, I mean, if you've ever been to a document retention conference, first of all, do you know that they have them? Second of all, you think your sales team can drink? My God, it's crazy. And the vendors selling those manila iron cast, filing cabinets, they're still out there. Go love those people. The people that care desperately about the organization and the profound correctness, the geeked outness of the ingredients that go into this data supply chain should be absolutely worshipped. And they're not. So to start back at the top of the Zachman pyramid, what is the business outcome? And that's not just what makes your shareholders happy. What is the purpose of my business? What does that mean strategically vis-a-vis other competitors? What does this mean with my current capabilities, my culture? How much dirt am I covering on this planet and into the sky? How does that all get supported with what I know through the data sources that I have and want to acquire? And now we can cascade through how are we acquiring, how are we honoring, how are we massaging this organic thing that is data is just this constantly, hopefully replenishing resource. And that's why you see this multidisciplinary approach. And I think that's very confusing to a lot of people that want an answer. Just tell me what to do. Just write me a memo. Just give me a flat something. It's a lot more like going to the doctor and saying, I have this list of sort of things, but I'm a unique organic unit, and so I need to be diagnosed. Every one of our companies is sort of a patient that needs to be, sort of treated with wellness, and data is its nutrition. So if we look at it in that way, and we think about it as, creatively of we're going to compete as Olympians with our data. If you have a really good system and you really understand what makes your system go, you're going to be able to feed that with data, and you're going to spend accordingly on the finest data ingredients you got. If you're kind of be a little bit of a data slug and you're just going to buy the cheap data and you're going to, trust that someone's got a billion consents, you're probably going to get a similar performance as, my sort of analog in the real world. And I think that's where it's frustrating for everyone involved, because you kind of give the Heisman to people that are there to help you. You kind of ignore these folks who've been off in the corner for a long time doing really skilled work. And that's where I think the good news is there's a lot of AI that can help us get through those slog tasks that nobody wants to do and get to the more interesting tasks. But I also think it's a radical leadership mindset that we have to jump over very quickly. And we have to teach this, to the kids coming up too. It used to be that the kids that were smarty pants read the Encyclopedia Britannica and were psyched when the supplement pages came out. I might be outing myself. Then Google came out and the dumbest kid was just as smart as we were. Now Gen AI exists. And so now we have to look at different skill sets for leadership. And we have to think about how does this read into who we're promoting and who we're asking to lead these new teams in this new world.
Yeah, I love that. I think that just like we've spent 10 to 15 years really ensuring that all our C-suites and boards are across the customer journey and the customer experience from beginning to end, we need to look at the same data lifecycle leadership across some of those senior roles in the business. And we're seeing it from the quality of data going in all the way through to the outputs that are starting to be produced by generative AI application. I think it was Air Canada that recently needed to honour some of the discounted pricing that was surfaced by one of the Gen AI chatbots that they were starting to use. And I think that level of accountability and responsibility that sits with those C-suite and board members means that they need to kind of be very hands on the ground when it comes to understanding data and the AI lifecycle across our business.
It's a great example. I mean, it was a bereavement fair and a chatbot said you had to do something. And the chatbot was wrong. And it was fed on wrong data. And they were like, oh, this thing was hallucinating, therefore not my fault. Not my fault works in the old analog world. Not anymore. New leadership says, oops, we made a mistake. It's a bereavement fair. We're going to give you your $200, whatever it was. And we're going to learn that everything on our website can be simultaneously ingested by these powerful models. And we're either going to change our ingestion plane or we're going to pay a lot of money in incorrect advice that we give to our flyers.
The potentiality for that to become a very complicated issue moving forward is immense. We probably touched on another great topic when it comes to leadership in an age of Gen AI, particularly when it pertains to data. And Randy, I think this would be a really good one to direct at you. 10 years ago, there were less than 12%. I think chief data and analytics officers, or 12% of companies had chief data and analytics officers. That has now been recognised as a very important function within the C-suite. I think now more than 82% of our Fortune 2000 and certainly enterprise organisations have that role. We're starting to witness the emergence of another new C-suite addition, which is the Chief AI Officer role. And that's aimed at helping to harness the potential of some of the AI opportunity out there, but it's also looking to try and bring together the concept and realm of data science and engineering with more human-centered leadership, strategic decision-making. You recently attended and spoke at the first Chief AI Officer Summit. I thought that you might have some insights to provide in terms of what you see as the realistic inclusion of a CAI officer into C-suites moving forward, what their responsibility and expertise would look like, and perhaps even the contentious issue, what the reporting framework should look like for that role.
Absolutely. So I'd say first that it's a work in progress and that organizations should proceed with caution. So to give you some context, in December, I was invited to participate in it was the 10th Chief Data Officer Conference, day one, and the second day was the inaugural first Chief AI Officer event, and it was held at the Institute for Experiential Learning at Northeastern University in Boston. And it's interesting because when they said it was the inaugural Chief AI Officer event, I quipped to somebody, didn't they try to do this in 1960? But they kind of looked at me with a blank face. And last week I was speaking with someone and they said, well, we've been working at this since the 1960s. And I said, yes, I get it. And I made that point to somebody at this conference and they looked at me like, what was I talking about? But, the part of the point is that the chief data officer role has really only been around for about 10 to 15 years. And as you pointed out, in 2012, 12% of organizations had a chief data officer. This year it was 83.2%. But when you ask, is the role successful and established, last year, it was only 35.5%. This year it actually increased, again, attributable to Gen AI, to 51%. But organizations are continuing to struggle with the role. And it's not that different. A generation ago, the CIO was a new role, and the joke of the time was CIO stood for career is over. So it shouldn't be an entire shock that organizations are struggling with what it means to be a chief data officer. And originally the role started off very much as a defensive role after the financial services crises of 2008, 2009, and then the analytics component was added in, and it's evolved considerably from a defensive role to an offensive role focused on business results. But as you create the chief AI officer role, it's already been pointed out the need for safeguards and guardrails. So some of the initial work is going to have to be that defensive work that lays the foundation before the offensive activities related to delivering business value could take place. I could actually talk for hours on this topic, but I'll pause right there.
Well, no, we appreciate your insights. And I know it's a very contentious topic at the moment as we start to see more and more CIOs rolled out, particularly across public sector. I know those positions have been increasingly gaining steam in all regions, from Asia Pacific all the way through the US. Michelle and Yassir, do you have anything else to offer or that you wanted to share around the potentiality of that Chief AI Officer? How realistic is that role? What is the remit? What should be the background of that individual, and potentially what the reporting structure looks like from your perspective?
Yeah, so the one thing I want to share is that I think this was last month. So the Biden administration and the Office of Management and Budget in the US have announced a new policy that requires federal agencies to appoint a chief AI officer. So just that action or that development itself, I think, is going to fuel the need and the opportunity for a lot of the executives, a lot of the professionals that are kind of sitting on adjacent areas to AI to potentially get involved and to take those roles. Now, I think similar to what Randy mentioned around the success of the chief data officer, it's too early to say, honestly. I'm not sure how successful they're going to be. I'm talking about chief AI officers. I think it's important role, especially considering the geopolitical and the aspects of or the impacts that could be a result of a organization either adopting or not adopting AI. I think it's an important and a crucial role. But then whether they're going to get the support and the investment that are required to properly deliver their mandate, that is a big question that we'll be able to get an answer for over time.
I'll wait and see. I agree with your assessment there. Michelle, do you have any perspective or opinion on the CAIO?
Yeah, I probably am the most sort of recent addition to the C-suite in privacy office. And it's interesting because as I've seen that role evolve and sort of devolve over the years, it really, it takes on the character of the adopter. So you see the role in a company like Google. So Keith Enright is a wonderful privacy officer. If you look at his day-to-day Rolodex, if anyone knows what that is anymore, if you look at his calendar every day, he probably does more litigation and defense and policy work than anything else. It's a vast network of many regional product-based. It's a data-driven ad tech beast and global. For others, it can be much more building the privacy engineering constructs. And so it's very engineering driven. For still others, it's very much driven by banking regulatory matters or transfer from agency to agency, so that the prominence of the role, the risk profile of the role, the type of leader of the role, privacy officers came from environmental law, they came from HR, they came from marketing, and they came from technology. And it still sort of has that balance. And so none of them are created equal. I think you're going to see a very similar profile. So I've talked to a lot of the med tech type people. Next year, we're going to be saying quantum like we're saying AI this year, especially in healthcare, because the density of the type of inquiry when you get into cellular research and the type of drug inquiry, given the amount of data that we have in that type of research, and especially for space travel and that kind of research, people want to use the qubit size and they don't need the precision of 0 and 1 gating. So are we going to call it then a chief quantum officer, or are we going to still use the vernacular and the umbrella of traditional AI? I don't know, because AI isn't just Gen AI. And so I think that's the interesting thing is, and I think that's where these sort of folks like my dad were talking about ethics and architecture and security in machine learning back in the 50s. And that's where all of this stuff came from is, is the size of government, are we losing democracy because our compute ability is downplaying our actual ability to vote? Are facts becoming outsized when they come out of, a typescript? So I think that's, it sounds a little bit hippy-dippy on my part. I'm not trying to dodge the question, but I think it's evolving because we don't have a clarity on what is that person doing for the business. Do we have some sort of a role for them for society? Do we have a cultural ambassador that is saying, there are these users that are beneficiaries or people that are negative beneficiaries of the results of AI results? And to put a finer point on that is, if AI accurately reflects society today, do we want it to? And so who will make that sort of call? Is that in the purview of private industry and a chief AI officer, or is that something that should be a community standard? And we don't have those answers yet.
You raise a great point in that we're realizing that it is becoming more and more difficult to anticipate what the next 2 to 3 year horizon looks like, and certainly define some of those remits as we move faster than ever before. So I love that perspective. Thanks, Michelle. Randy, Tom Davenport, good friend of yours, recently released a report that was looking at data leaders, and it surfaced, I think there was over 350 data leaders, it surfaced that the biggest challenge data leaders are seeing globally in the implementation or adoption of Gen AI was data quality. Not surprising. We know fragmented, poor quality data undermines our ability to make informed decisions, and that's all accelerated in an age of AI. I'd love to hear from each of you, because I think it is organizational wide. What's the one thing that we should all be doing as leaders to improve data quality? And say that again. What's the one thing that we should be doing as leaders across the organization to improve data quality? And I think I'll start with Michelle, just because I can guess at her answer.
Oh, I wonder if it's going to be your guess. I'm going to say delete, 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 delete. If it doesn't spark joy, you must delete.
Yep, love it. Yassir?
Yeah, no. What I'm thinking is centralize. I think that's the one thing. Me and having as little data repositories as possible, and making sure that we scrutinize data coming in and out of those systems. And you are familiar with the saying of garbage in, garbage out. I think that's something we should be mindful of, even more than before going forward. And then lastly, I mean, I think you asked for one thing, but I'm giving you three. But it is to understand the data flows. Where does the data originate? How does it get transformed? And where does it hit kind of the AI production, if you will? And then protecting that entire pipeline from beginning to the end.
And Randy?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in the survey, by the way, efforts to improve data quality have been successful. Only 37% said yes. And to Yassir's point, I was going to make the same point, except for I was going to use the term data lineage. That's an exercise that went through with a number of organizations so that business leaders and users could really understand where data was consumed and data was produced. I guess it equates to data flows. So that was by far the most effective tool that I experienced.
Yeah, I love that so much too, because it's not just creating a data map, which is like people are amassing these massive log files that are just like, look, I have a map of the stars. It's really provenance. It's understanding value according to where are you placing this beautiful gem and why is it important there? Why does it fit in this setting?
Excellent points. Thank you. Now, this is a very topical area right now, particularly because we understand that we've got issues when it comes to bias and fairness in data powering some of the AI algorithms that are used in various applications right now, and the impact that has on the proliferation of deepfakes and misinformation. I recently learnt that there's 49% of the 8 billion people in the world going into elections this year, which is a huge tipping point in terms of changing what will be the future of our society, regulation, and certainly business environments. I thought each of you might have some thoughts on maybe some of the greatest risks or examples that you've seen around misinformation and deepfakes, and how you would recommend business leaders that are with us today mitigate some of those threats.
Yeah, I can start. So as far as misinformation, I think we, as you mentioned, we are getting into kind of the election season, if you will, especially here in the US. And we will, in a few months from now, we'll start to understand the efforts that are taking place right now to leverage AI to kind of drive or influence public sentiments. I think it's a little bit too early to talk about that, but one thing that is absolutely sure is that we're starting to see efforts to use AI, specifically deepfakes, to increase the effectiveness of some of the traditional attacks. There was a bank or an organization, I would say, from Hong Kong, I think a few months ago, where a deepfake video or WhatsApp, I think, was used to persuade a finance leader to approve a transfer. I think the impact was something like $24 million. Don't quote me on this, but I know it was a material impact on this organization. There's nothing new there, right? It is the same social engineer we've been seeing for years, except that it's going to be a lot more effective, a lot realistic, and then we're going to be using video as opposed to just email, video and sound, and kind of the potential there and the possibilities are endless, really. Like, they can be positive, they can be negative. I mean, a few years from now, 10 years from now, there could be a virtual AI representation of myself that's talking to you guys and kind of that understand every aspect of my life and my knowledge and so on, and that is able to express and articulate my ideas. That could be something that we can see in the future. But going back to your question, Carrie, these are two things that I see as being risks. Again, deepfakes, we're already seeing that. And then as far as election, I think the influence on public sentiment, I think, is going to be a hot topic going forward.
Yeah, it all comes down to trust there, doesn't it? And certainly perhaps adjusting our trust spectrum moving forward. Michelle?
Try to keep it as grounded, but Yassir has tickled my brain as usual. I was actually at a user group at u.com. So it's another one of these Gen AI groups, really fascinating founder, very young man, doing interesting things. And one of his investors created a bot of himself. And so he is an investor. And so to get back, like the cool thing now, which is very uncool for anyone you watching, is to just ghost potential portfolio companies. So you've spent time together, you prepare your stuff, you have long conversations, they do due diligence, and if they decide they don't want to invest in you, they simply ignore you and never speak to you again. It's super obnoxious, it's super unfair, and it's very unethical. So just so you guys know, it's terrible. So what he decided to do was like, hey, I'm going to make myself a better investor, and I'll make myself into a bot, and I'll behave better. And it's sort of like the bedside manner that Randy was talking about. Like, these doctors don't always have the best bedside manner. They might be great surgeons because they can cut people's bodies open, but they might not have the best, UX for humans. So he did this thing where he was actually nicer in his own deep fake than he is actually self-attested in person. So it's an interesting kind of a thing where maybe you can self-extend and make yourself more available, but it's still a deep fake and not genuine. So I think the distrust that we're going to inevitably face is, what is reality? If you've ever met one of your idols in person who's a star, sometimes they're mean. Sometimes they've just met too many people that also think that they're great. And I think that there's a lot of this sort of issues of, we have a lot of unresolved sort of people issues before we even get to the tech issues here. And the tech issues are quite challenging.
Yeah, the other thing that comes to mind as I heard Michelle's comment is this concept of autonomous decision-making, or autonomy in general. Like, when can we see the situation where AI becomes autonomous and acts as us? And I think that's an area that deserves a lot of scrutiny and, frankly, regulations at some point, because it is full of opportunity and risk, right? When you think about scenarios like autonomous vehicles, or a bot that decides whether you, Carrie, or Michelle, or Randy gets access to credits, or whether you're going to have your surgery approved by an insurance company. So, life and death situations that deserve to have enough investments, enough guardrails put in place for us to make sure that, we're not taking more risks that we can manage, frankly. And going back to the example of autonomous vehicles, before we saw an autonomous vehicle on the road, some of these companies had to drive millions of miles, right, with the help of a human. So you always have a human in the loop before those companies were granted the authorization to start operating or having their vehicles being drive autonomously. So, sorry, it's in that same spirit that we need to, again, establish and roll out these guardrails and compliance requirements to make sure that any autonomous decision making is done within, these guardrails and regulations.
I agree. Every industry, every application is a highly regulated industry when it comes to, or application when it comes to autonomy, particularly with machine or LLM decision-making. Randy, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Nothing really to add, except for to say among business leaders, the risk of spread of misinformation, disinformation was by far their biggest concern. And, from my perspective, if there's all these potential opportunities for good things relative to medicine and healthcare and things of that kind, I do worry about social media as an avenue for misinformation and disinformation.
Yeah, it's a very, very apt point. Let's move forward a little bit. I know that we're almost coming up to the end of our time. One of the big focuses today was to really get around C-suite silos and start to bring together functions to have what is an all-organization conversation around the use of data as a product in the age of AI. So I thought it would be remiss for us to miss the opportunity for each of you, which obviously we cover various different functions within our orgs, to share, if you had 30 seconds with a peer, whether that's CMO or product or engineering, to discuss the future of Gen AI and data, what would you use it to, what advice would you give and why? Because I think we're all short on time. We all need to continually collaborate and certainly educate. But I'd love to hear what's your impactful message from each perspective on that topic.
Yeah, so I can start. I'd say that conversation with any executive will be centered around how Gen AI can help the business or the organization, and asking them, what does Gen AI mean for you now and maybe 5 years from now? How do you see us as an organization evolving and competing and being better and more effective through the adoption of Gen AI? And then on a kind of shorter time horizon perspective, what does that mean in terms of objectives and targets and initiatives that need to be executed and especially prioritized for execution? Because I think we all know, and we've been in situations where we want everything now, but that's obviously it's never possible. So we have to prioritize and we have to execute based on impact and resource availability as well. So again, that conversation would be around what do we need to know to do, a quarter from now, a year from now, and 5 years from now.
Love it. Long-term horizons. Randy?
I'd say several things. Some of it's similar, but I'd say it doesn't matter whether you love AI or hate AI. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. So if you have to prepare for it regardless of your point of view. And it's going to be a significant technology transformation, at least the greatest that we've seen in the current generation, maybe for several generations. But ultimately, it's a tool. It's a tool for good or for bad. Locomotives, trains got people to their destination faster, but sometimes they went off the track. So there's both good and bad things that can happen. But to echo Yassir, I think the most important thing is to take a long-term perspective and really think through what you're trying to achieve for your organization. What are the safeguards? Who are your customers? How can these capabilities best serve your customers? And really think of it as a long game and how this capability can fit into that long view.
Love it. Michelle?
All right, I'm gonna read from a list of something from requirements, constraints, and desirables that I think are applicable here. The requirements are that we protect all data, we make the protection adjustable, we know the protection status of our data at all times. The constraints, we can't rely on the sentience of all of our human operators. We can't rely on the cooperation of our humans. Our recovery has no role, only just the protection. And then the desirables, we have value-creating side effects. We're very nearly future-proof, or at least we're predicting where we're going wrong. And we have a low or no cost, good to people doing good things. Now, the reason I picked out this packet of things is this is a list that Dan Geer wrote in 2003. So the stability of how we can launch ourselves into the unknown should supply us with a great deal of comfort, because the game remains the same for us, even though the facts have changed somewhat.
And I'm going to add to that as a marketing lead, one of the challenges that we see across our buying communities, business to business or business to consumer, is that we now have 6 generations of buyers. So 6 different levels of data literacy, 6 different generations and levels of technology literacy that we interact with on a daily basis. And that's true of our internal teams as well. And so I think recognizing that there's probably not going to be a one-size-fits-all guardrail that makes sense based on the levels of literacy and culture that we see across the organization. And that kind of brings us full circle to Randy's earlier points around that data and AI culture and literacy being so key to making sure that we get this opportunity right without bringing down too many systems, and certainly our levels of trust in information and our relationships with business. So that actually is bringing us very close to the end of our time today, but I thought we would end on a little bit of a fun question, if it makes sense for all of you. Michelle, I often rib as the only chief privacy officer I've ever seen turn up on an episode of Dr. Phil. For those people who have not seen it, Michelle was featured in Dr. Phil in the Chip Girl episode, which probably has a lot more relevance now that Neuralink is out. So this is obviously embedding chips, which is very in line with some of the advancements that we've seen in brain-computer interfaces right now. Dr. Phil, for me, is the title of Dr. Phil's show, things that you never want to happen. Basically, it is a cautionary tale. So I would ask you all, if there was a Dr. Phil episode about the future of Gen AI that you do not want to see in the future, what would the title of that episode be?
Oh, God. Well, I'll say in one defense of Phil, and I can't call him Dr. Phil, and he was Dr. McGraw.
You're so tight now? It's only Phil.
No, I just can't bear to call anyone Dr. first name. I find it so pretentious. But he gets 3.2 million viewers every day. He gets more viewers than the president of the United States on a consistent basis of people that we want to reach. That's why I got on that show to talk about ethics and how to slow your roll as the owner of the household purse of like, how do I want the American housewife and the Canadian housewife to think about interfacing with this brave new world of generational, not just generative AI, but generational AI, because we're going to have to start making some really hard decisions here. We're not going to have enough precious minerals to have battery power so that everyone gets to compute every query they want. How are we going to decide which diseases to go after? How are we going to decide which elections to test? How are we going to decide which videos and which movies and what kind of entertainment we want to go see? So there's a lot of hard questions that are facing our Gen Zs and double A's or whatever they're calling. So what we do now matters a lot.
And so the title of your episode is?
How do we serve the future?
Okay, awesome. I love that. Thanks, Michelle. Randy, Yassir, you may not have been as familiar with that episode as Michelle, but is there a cautionary title that you do not want to see appearing on a talk show in the future when it comes to Gen AI and our data as a product?
I just say, AI is not going to destroy mankind. In other words, I know some people sentiment, but, if we really approach it in a thoughtful, long-term fashion, there will be some harms, but there can also be great benefits, and we should focus on the positive outcomes and not be consumed by fear.
I love that optimism and the right approach for something that is inevitable in our future. Yassir?
Yeah, I would title that episode how Company X, and I'm not talking about Twitter, Company X or XYZ dominates the AI industry, right? How they were able to achieve 95% dominance, right? I think it's too much responsibility and power to give to one company or organization. In fact, there's a lot of debate in the industry on whether AI should be open source versus closed source and so on. I think we need to maintain certain amount of distribution, if you will, of that power, and we cannot expect, or at least we cannot live with a world where there's one company or maybe two companies that have the majority of stake in AI, which is a technology that is poised to essentially define how we live as a species going forward.
That is a very, very sage point, and off the back of a Dr. Phil question. So well done, Yassir, for wrapping us up on that. With that, we've actually run out of time for this special edition of the Tech Seeking Human podcast. I've really appreciated Michelle, Randy, Yassir, having you all on the show today. It's a huge topic, data as a product in the age of AI, and it's certainly something that requires ongoing and increased dialogue between all of our cross-functional executives and teams to make sure that we move responsibly, but at speed, to realize benefits and overcome some of the obstacles that sit in front of us. Thank you for joining us. You've given us lots of food for thought so that we can continue those conversations. And for all of the global community that's listening or watching, I would say, again, we build these sessions for you. So thank you for the request on bringing together some of these functional leads. We're going to keep them coming, and we're happy to continue the conversation on social. So I know Randy, Michelle, Yassir, open to questions and certainly open to dialogue about some of the topics we've discussed today moving forward. And until next time, I'd say stay curious.